So I said in the last lecture, utilitarianism is a more complicated theory than it might initially seem. And I want to talk about a problem case that's representative of a much larger group of problem cases that starts to show us how utilitarianism gets more complicated. And the problem case is this. Imagine there's a boy drowning in an icy river. Do you save him or not? What would a utilitarian say to do? Well, and you probably think, well, of course you save him. Look, family's happy if you save him. The boy, he is almost certainly going to go live a life where he has more happiness than not. You allow all that to happen. Even from your own perspective, if you save a boy, people are probably going to like you. It's win, 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 win. Of course, save the boy, right? Depends on how dangerous it is, how likely you are to save him. But if you could just walk in to this icy water, it'll be up to your waist, and pull this kid out, you should, of course, do it, right? Seems like a slam dunk, both for common sense and for utilitarianism. This seems like another case where it gives you a pretty good account of what you should do, pretty sensible reasons as to why. But let me complicate the case. Imagine that you are in Passau, Germany, and it's 1894, and this boy is drowning. What should you do then? You might say, well, of course you should still save him. Some of you might be starting to be a little skeptical. Some of you might even start to think you have an idea of what was going on, and you probably do. Well, what if the little boy was Hitler, right? Now, it's not 100%. People aren't certain of this, but the locals in Passau say that Hitler fell in the water as a little boy in 1894 and that somebody saved him. We do know that the Hitler family lived in Passau at the time, and Hitler talked about playing in this river or near this river to his generals. We also know that in the local newspaper, a boy exactly Hitler's age was reported as falling in the river. So it seems fairly likely that this was Hitler who fell in the water. Even if it wasn't, though, the general problem remains. And the problem is this. You utilitarians, you say do whatever creates the most happiness, but it's impossible to know what that actually is. Usually saving a small child from drowning will create the most happiness, but what if he's the next Hitler? There is at least some chance of that, some chance that an apparently good action could have horrible, horrible consequences, and we do not know the future or long-term consequences of our actions. Well, if that's true, then utilitarianism just doesn't tell us what to do. It's not useful as a moral theory because we don't know the future. Seemingly good action, like saving a small boy from drowning. A local did dive in and save Hitler. He was an older boy, and he later became a priest. He told his successor at the church that it was Hitler he saved. So again, there's pretty good evidence that it was. General point, it doesn't really matter too much though, right? The idea is utilitarianism doesn't tell us what to do because we do not know the future consequences of our actions. Okay, so what might a utilitarian say to this? Well, I think their answer, at least their basic answer, is a fairly simple one, and it seems at first glance to be a good one. And it's just this. We might not be able to know for certain, but we have a pretty good idea of the odds. And just take the odds into account, right? Well, This boy drowning in the water, he might be the next Hitler, but he might be the next Jonas Salk, the guy who invented the polio vaccine. He might be the guy who cures cancer. Both of those are really unlikely. What's way more likely is he's just an ordinary little boy, right? The utilitarian will say, you don't know the results of your actions for certain, but you have a pretty good idea of the odds, and you can take the odds into account. Little boy drowning in the water is almost certainly just an ordinary little boy who doesn't have a remarkable future one way or the other in front of him. No insult, most of us don't, right? If that's the truth, almost certainly you saving him will create the greatest overall happiness. Now, we'll come back to this because I think, for some cases, this seems like a pretty good answer, right? If you say the utilitarian, well, we don't know the future, we don't know the effects of our actions for sure, so we don't know what to do with the theory. The utilitarian can just say, oh, come on, right? Imagine you have a very important test tomorrow that you don't feel super confident about. What would you do? Hopefully you would study tonight, right? If some friend came up to you and said, hey, let's go out and go drinking, even if you, would ordinarily do that, you probably hopefully wouldn't do that, right? And if your friend said, well, maybe there's a chance that the professor just gives everyone an A, right? Or class is canceled tomorrow, you'll definitely be happy tonight if you go out and stay out late, and you don't know the future for sure. It's even possible that the professor has some weird principle he gives everyone who throws up in class in a trash can an A. You don't know, right? You'd hopefully just laugh at your friend because it's like, look, yeah, that's all possible. It's really unlikely. What's more likely is he grades this like an ordinary test, and if I don't study, and especially if I'm like out of it because I don't sleep or I'm hungover, I'm going to get a terrible grade. I don't know for sure, but that is the most likely thing, and that gives me good reason to stay in and maybe even to do some studying. An utilitarian would say, think about most actions you make in life. You don't know the consequences for sure, but you don't need to know what you should do. Same with the utilitarian and creating better consequences. Now, we will come back to this because I actually think there's a bigger problem here than the utilitarians let on. I want to get the theory more fully out and to look at the way some people apply it with this effective altruism stuff. But one thing I want you guys to notice already is the theory is starting to get more and more complicated. You already have this utilitarian calculus, people will say. You have to think of the number of people affected times the intensity of the effect, whether good or bad, and then the odds that it will happen. All of these different factors have to be weighed into your judgment of what you should do. The theory, which seemed to be very simple to start with, I think you can see is starting to get maybe not very complex yet, but it is starting to get complex in a way that might surprise you. Okay, so after this lecture, I want you guys to read the Reluctant Prophet of Effective Altruism article. This will show us some more ways, that utilitarianism gets complex, and also how some people have tried to apply utilitarian reasoning in their whole lives. What it would look like if you were a good and consistent utilitarian. Well, this guy McCaskill that we're going to read about thinks he has that figured out, as well as some other guys. All right, so read that, then we will get a bit more into how utilitarianism works and what it's supposed to look like in practice.